Your biggest issue might not be what you think it is. At the core, it's always a trust issue. The number one question everybody's asking about you is not, do I like you? It is, can I trust you? Here is special because these are the people. They're often the ones that are really driving attrition down, retention up. These are the people that get that people are the most important asset, and I want to give them some things they can do to even build more trust. Welcome to the Trusted Experience from around the world. We get to do this virtually. When we look at isolated issues like culture, turnover, sales, leadership, even engagement, it doesn't matter what the problem appears to be. We've seen it in the research, and we've seen it in the organizations we've worked with around the world. The real problem always comes down to trust.
I firmly believe that with programs like this, it's the foundation of any organization. Any other leadership program won't work until you put things like this in place.
If trust is this important, how do you actually build it? How do you do it? Here's what it looks like. The foundation of the program is based on the 8 pillars for building a high trust culture throughout your organization.
These are the core issues that make a trusted brand, global government, or solo operation.
Here we go. Number 1. What did we learn? We learned people trust the clear and they mistrust or distrust the ambiguous. They also mistrust or distrust the overly complex. I see branding groups, I see marketing groups around the world overcomplexify things to look smart and they lose trust. But the 3 most overlooked, underused questions that actually lead to clarity, that changes things, that takes an idea to an action, they're these. How? Number 2 is even more important. And the most important question of all is, from this day forward, how? If you want to change something, you've got to ask how until you will do it.
His enthusiasm, the way he could relate, he can make trust a real thing.
Energetic and amazing. He did exactly what I wanted him to do.
If you haven't been to a rodeo for a while, here's how it works. First half of the rodeo, the cowboys and cowgirls rope things. Second half of the rodeo, they get bucked off of things. In the middle, they let the locals get involved. They call it mutton busting. For those of you that don't know what this is where they let 5 to 8-year-old kids see how long they can last riding a big Suffolk sheep. I don't know why. I looked down at my 5 and 8-year-old at the time, and they are looking at me with eyes of terror. Vanessa is one of the last to go. She's the lightest kid in her class, littlest kid in her class. I said, Vanessa, you can't do it like that. Vanessa, you got to take those dangly 8-year-old legs. It was her birthday that day. She just turned 8. I said, Vanessa, you got to take those dangly 8-year-old legs and wrap them around the belly. You got to pinch your heels as tight as you can. Vanessa, you got to lay down. You got to velcro your belly to the wall. You got to wrap your arms around there. You got to dig your fingers into the wall. And whatever you do, Vanessa, don't let go. I'm a great dad. They open the bull gate. This little girl, she's holding on. People say, look at the, can you believe it? Look at the little girl. She's cruising across the arena. The clowns come out. Little girl, you can let go now. She will not let go. I walk out into the arena. I pick my daughter off. She grabs onto my neck. We're in the middle of the arena with people cheering. And I'll never forget what she said in my ear that night. Daddy, Why'd the clown say let go? You said never let go. She was committed. And she trusted herself. Think she was scared? I bet you're scared sometimes. As a board member or parent, I am. But you and I have got to hold on. We're in the greatest industry with the greatest opportunity for the future that ever was. And we've got to build these pillars in ourselves if we ever want to be trusted by our kids, our teachers, our students, or each other, and especially ourselves.
I took 3 pages worth of notes. It was time very well spent.
And I gained some amazing insight today.
Last year, on the US side of the study, the #1 reason people want to work for an organization ahead of more benefits, ahead of getting paid more, ahead of a more fun work environment, they want to trust their leadership more than anything else. You could put any generation in this spot, traditionalists, boomers, XYZ, and ABC, and they all said exactly the same thing, plus or minus 1%. We're more similar than you think. People love to work with people and for leaders they trust.
Blown away by it. It was exactly what I needed to hear this morning.
Best keynote speakers I've ever seen.
This message is so powerful, it's literally transformative.
Trust is a confident belief in a person, a product, and an organization. And when I confidently believe in you, everything changes.
So relevant, and buckle up because it's going to be a ride.
Fully invested within 5 minutes. He was great.
David's presentation this morning was one of the best that I've ever heard.
You've got to build these pillars authentically so we can trust ourselves enough if we're ever going to be able to build it on our team or in our store or in our community. Because at the end of the day, everything of value is built on one thing: trust. Here we go. Ready? Buckle your seatbelts. We got to get to something common, and then we're going to get to the framework of exactly how I believe trust is built the fastest. Before we get there, we have to get to a common understanding of what we think trust is, because people think they understand trust. Even, when I was doing my graduate, almost no one, many of you have been in research. When you do research, you have to start with research of the research, and there's none out there. There was none, almost none. There was trust in therapy, Oprah, there was all these, but there wasn't trust in how it affects the bottom line and business and that kind of thing in those days. Now everybody's talking about it, with and mostly without research, right? But back then, and so today you'll even hear people say trust is certain things when it's, it might not be those things. Like there's an expert today that says trust is transparency. And we know, of course, transparency can build trust from the research. But transparency isn't trust. I mean, some of your kids are so transparent on social media, I don't trust them for a second, right? Confidentiality is also trusted. You think of medical records or anything. Trust, it could be different than we think. So we have to come with a common definition because we have different pictures of trust in our minds. So let's get to a definition at least and to a common picture. I mean, a few pictures of trust first. Gentlemen in the room, here's a picture of trust. Who wants to be the first dude? Dr. Phillips, you're up. I understood, when my sons understood my work, I'm like, they get it. I walked into a public restroom, the stall was obviously not available, and I thought, they understand my work. Even animals have a perspective of trust. But how would you define it? Be ready. You have 60 seconds at your table. Define trust with one word. 60 seconds, especially in the back. Be ready. I'm going to call you out. Ready? Go. 60 seconds. What's a word for trust? If you had to define it with one word, how would you do it? Go. All right, here we go, team. Back and forth because we have to get some important things. When I talk again, just come back to me, even if you haven't settled on a definition. Ready? Everybody? Thank you, left corner. From my perspective. Unworried. Oh, wouldn't that be amazing? Far corner, front table, what do you got? Reliable. If I'm reliable, I tend to trust them. What do you think in the middle right here? You thought looking away was going to help, didn't you? You're like, if I just look away when he points at me, he won't talk to me. Okay, what do you think?
Security. Safety and security is the definition of trust, isn't it? Of course. What do you think somewhere in this part? Honesty. What do you think here? Belief. If I have a belief in it, I tend to trust it. What do you think, Daniel? Accountable. If you don't create healthy accountability, what do I see most? I mean, whether we're dealing with corruption issues in East Africa or team issues on the Yankees, or if you're dealing with company issues at FedEx or Procter & Gamble, if you don't create healthy accountability, you cannot have high trust. Some of you think, because you're going to see one of the pillars of trust is compassion and care, you think that means to overlook things. What do I most often see? No accountability or unhealthy accountability. You've got to have healthy accountability. You have to. What do you think in the middle? Consistency is trusted, isn't it? It's a great word for trust because whatever you do consistently, I will trust. If you are late all the time, I will absolutely trust you to be late. If you consistently don't wear enough clothes, I trust you're Kardashian, right? So whatever you do consistently, absolutely. What do you think up here? Reliable is trusted. What do you think? Anything different? Anything different? Thank you. What do you think? Anything different? Honesty and, pardon me? Trust is challenging. This is work. This is the biggest challenge of my work. I remember when a mentor of mine, CEO, said, David, if you start your practice on trust, I mean, that people don't want that. How about do this? Do image work. People want to look trusted. You know how much Wells Fargo spent on looking trusted after the debacle and not on actually doing it? Now they've started. The problem is trust takes work. I don't know of anything more important, though. The research always shows trust was the leading indicator and the root cause. I'll show it. One more idea from the back or anywhere over here? Faith or confidence or safety. All of those, of course. If I have faith in it, I tend to trust it. If it's reliable, if it's dependable, if I feel safe. You can, those of you right up here in the front, as you know, learning and development never happens in a deep way if people don't feel safe. I will argue today, these are true, and I'll give a definition, but I will argue today, trust is always the root issue. Always. First, let me define it in our way, and we'll use a few words, but we could have used many of what you said today. We had to come to something common. We say trust is a confident belief in a person, a product, or an organization. When I can confidently believe in you, everything changed. This was that original grad work when we found hundreds of organizations, thousands of leaders. I'll put it on one slide, the whole work, and now I think we put out the biggest study out of North America on trust and leadership. Every time trust was the root issue, this is it. When trust increased, then output, morale, retention, productivity, innovation, loyalty went up. Your staffing problem is a trust problem. Your diversity, equity, inclusion problem is a trust problem. It's always a trust issue at the core, and when we can deal with that, we actually solve the real issue. You never have a leadership issue at the core. We use these big words. The only reason you follow a leader or not is trust. People in sales don't have a sales issue. The reason people buy has something to do with trust. Even if they don't like the person, but they have water they think will keep them alive in the desert, they trust that and they'll buy. It always has something to do with trust. There's only one way this team will innovate more. When trust goes up, then they're willing to share ideas. They're not scared to death. But if they don't trust each other, your innovation just tanked. Diversity, equity, inclusion. The biggest Harvard study I know on the topic shows diversity of almost any kind. Let's get away from just color of skin. Diversity of almost any kind tends to put people against each other in some way, unless you increase trust. And then you get enormous benefits, research-based, of diversity, equity, inclusion, and a host of other things, right? You have to deal with the trust issue. How do we increase learning in a classroom? There's only one way. You have to increase trust in the content, the teacher, or the psychological safety, or trust of the room. That's the only way learning goes up. We have to, it's never at the core an engagement issue. The reason, well, it might be, but you don't get engagement with engagement, we now know. This is why we created the Enterprise Trust Index. You've got to measure trust and engagement because the only way to get engagement to go up is trust. It's just like Net Promoter Score. We don't get referrals with referrals. You have to increase trust, and that leads to more referrals. If we can start to see it as a trust issue, and particularly one of these 8 I will discuss, you can start to solve the real issue. I grew up in the poorest county in Minnesota. What does that mean? No lakes in that county. That's what that means in Minnesota because there's lakes everywhere. Or You grew up in the part of the state where it was sand and rocks that you tried to farm on instead of the nice Red River Valley, right? That's where I grew up, 1,500-acre bean farm. What I remember is, I didn't grow up in Verndale, Minnesota, 500 people. I grew up 8 miles from Verndale. I remember driving farm to home halfway. At the end of his long dirt driveway in the middle of the countryside, Mr. Olson's veggie stand. At the end of his driveway, beautiful vegetables. And next to the veggies, a box with cash bills sticking out of it. But nobody worked the stand. What are you supposed to do at Mr. Olson's stand? Have you seen this kind of thing? You make your own change and pay what you owe, right? So because it's built on trust, he doesn't have to pay anybody to be there. Saves money. And it's incredibly efficient. You can take and go as fast as you can, right? This does not mean I believe you should trust everyone. This simply means where you can create trust in your domain, you can increase efficiency. Even though Mr. Olson no longer runs his stand like that. But when you can increase trust, you can do something about it. You can see the bottom line impact, the stress impact. At the core, it is always a trust issue. So let's get simple without going into a bunch of research. A lock is a good example of a lack of trust, isn't it? The only reason I put a lock on anything is because I don't trust you. And what's the cost of putting a lock on something? Money, I got to buy the lock. But the biggest cost is time. Thank you, brilliant one. Now I've got to open the gate. What if it's a combination lock? Ah! Forevermore. Write a text to someone you trust. How long does that take? Boop! Now, write a text to someone you don't trust. How long does that take? Oh, delete. They're going to take that wrong. Oh, delete. You got a teenager you trust Friday nights going to the game with their teenage friends? You got a teenager you don't trust? What's that feel like? You got a colleague you trust? You got a colleague you don't trust? Your biggest cost is a lack of trust, and we have to see it for that or we can't do anything about it. And by the way, we all have lacks. I'm telling you, I teach 100 times a year on this. I'm passionate about this, and I'm totally imperfect at it. Ask my teenagers. I wish I would have responded to a 15-year-old daughter differently last week on something. So today, we'll talk about this, and some of you will be thinking the whole time, ooh, I wish that person was here. Ooh, my spouse needs this stuff. Oh, they should be here. I know the person that needs this. I hear it all the time. Often I'm signing books in the back, and I'm like, ooh, can you sign this book to that person because they really need it? I'm going to give it to them. They're not here. You're here and I'm here, so let's get into something we can do about it. And by the way, I'm convicted every time about things I can do about this. At the core, it is always a trust issue. We have to see it as that. I believe a lack of trust, the biggest expense we have. We can go into research all day, but we got to keep moving. Let me give a glimpse of a couple of the newest studies. Our research is called the Trust Outlook. If you'd like access to it, we don't take sponsorship or money. We give it away because we don't want to be skewed on trust research. So let me just give you a couple data points on this. Number one reason people want to work for an organization in first world countries. If you couldn't put food on the table, it could be compensation. But in all first world countries over the last several years, the number one reason people want to work for an organization, ahead of more pay or a more fun work environment with a ping pong table. They want to trust their leadership more than anything else. 9 out of 10 Americans wouldn't refer products or services they don't trust. What about generations? Oh, they're so different, those generations. Well, boomers would work longer hours, plus or minus 1%. Traditionalists, X, Y, Z, they all said exactly the same thing. Half of people invested $100,000 or more based purely on trust. I was blown away by the next statistic that found 13 million Americans have invested $100,000 or more based purely on trust. I started thinking about, we had an investment company, we sold our last piece of real estate during the pandemic, and I thought, you know what, I bought that on my iPhone while being driven to an event. I'd never been there. 7 years later, we sold it. It was a great thing for the company. What's it like when you can trust your manager? It's unbelievable. What if I couldn't trust my manager?